In the midst of all the discussions about the war in Ukraine and how we are going to emerge from COVID, some may have missed the fact that we are in the middle of a global food security crisis, in part provoked by those major world events, but there are many other issues going on in the field of agriculture and agri-food. And ownership and distribution and all these related issues. So we've gone to the expert to talk to us about this, Dr. Sylvain Charlebois. He is a professor in food distribution and policy in the faculties of management and agriculture at the University of Dalhousie. And he's senior director of the agri-food analytics. And that's kind of a section that we'll talk about the work they're doing. Dr. Charlebois, we have found you in the United States of America today. What are you doing there?
Lots of things. I've actually been here since January. I'm a visiting scholar at the University of South Florida. I'm working with a great group of people doing some research, essentially. I'm still obviously working at Dal, but from here, the luxury of being a social scientist is that you can actually work with a group of 15 people from anywhere around the world. So I'm here with my family and enjoying the Florida weather, but we'll be back in Canada next week.
Okay, that's great. I see a little bit of a tan, and people will be envious of that. And
right, you can't get that tan in Halifax,
go back away
for sure.
To the University of Guelph, where I was chancellor, and where you were doing your thing there for many years. So it's lovely to see you. Okay, let's get down to this, because honestly, global food security crisis, what does that mean?
It means that a growing number of people will experience either famine or will suffer from hunger, unfortunately, and the shift is quite violent due to a number of factors. If you have to kind of create this playbook for a global food crisis, that's basically what we're seeing right now over the last, I'd say, 12 to 24 months, starting with climate. Climate has always been a problem, obviously, for agriculture.
Right.
And just last year, we saw droughts in Canada, the US, Russia as well. It's a big producer of grains, and floods affected Germany as well. So lots going on there. We started 2022 with very low inventories. So that's one thing. Secondly, the pandemic. The pandemic really weakened supply chain. This COVID hangover has impacted our ability to move products around, whether it's because we lost people. When you lose people within the food supply chain, you tend to waste more because you have the cold chain and the regular chain. And so if you move anything around the world, whether it's on water or on land, it will cost you more because the global economy is no longer as synchronized. And in logistics, you need to plan ahead. You need to know when your products are going to be from day to day. And that's something that companies couldn't do anymore or can't do anymore. Things are getting better. I would say over the last 6 weeks, things are improving very slowly.
Except that you've got fuel and diesel prices going up, and then that's restricting the delivery end of the supply chain.
That's right. So slowly, commodity prices have creeped up, including energy and oil as well. So that really has made things very complicated logistically around the world, and that has impacted our food supply chain, our global food supply chain. And then, of course, you have the war in Ukraine, which really just created, I would say, generated a new inflation cycle essentially all over again with higher commodity prices, and we're all being hit very hard by that right now at the pump with energy costs, with oil, but also we saw this morning coming out of Statistics Canada numbers for April, 9.7%, the highest food inflation rate in decades. And people are noticing
that for weeks. You knew it was higher than what StatsCan was actually capturing.
That's right. So we're actually really getting close to the actual picture of what consumers are actually seeing at the grocery store. And when you go through the grocery list on the StatsCan website, you can see that many items are being impacted by what's happening around the world. Meat products,
Yeah,
produce, dairy as well is being impacted as well by what's happening. So there's even the center of the store, and I often laugh about the fact that I use peanut butter as an example, but peanut
yeah,
butter has been priced the same for many years, except
yeah,
for this year. It's up to 11%, and people will notice that.
yeah, because that's what you're making the kids sandwiches out of. So, you know,
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
do see it. I mean, the governor of the Bank of England, he used the word apocalyptic. I don't know. Do you feel that, or is that just
Uh,
kind of shock effect so we all pay attention?
I mean, the shock is real. I wouldn't say it's apocalyptic. I think there's a new normal out there. I
Yeah,
do believe, Senator Wallin, that Canadian families will have to accept the fact that they will have to dedicate a much um, larger portion of their budget on two things: lodging, as we see in real estate right now, and
yeah.
food as well. So before COVID, the average family was spending about 9.1% of its budget on food. And I actually think that's going to increase significantly as a result of what we're seeing. So, apocalyptic, I would say, if food access was a problem for Canada, yes, I would say it's a problem. But I don't think food access is going to be a problem because we can actually buy our way out of a food
It's just going to
security
be
problem.
price. Yeah,
It's price. Yeah,
yeah. So but I mean, there are like 190 million people in the world that are sort of borderline starvation and dependent on UN food programs and all those things already.
that's right.
So, we might be able to afford to pay, or many would be able to afford to pay a little more, but then there's the major supply issue for those that are already on
That's
the
right. You
starving
just
end of the
mentioned the World
scale.
Food Program. 9% of the volume of grains provided to the World Food Program comes from Ukraine.
Yeah.
So you can see that we're going to be in a deficit for a variety of ag commodities, including wheat, barley,
Yeah.
corn, sunflower. So it's going to be really, and that's why I did comment recently about vegetable oil because it's just one of many things that we're going to be running out of.
I mean, we seem when I drive through the province of Saskatchewan, there's lots of canola being planted, but
Yeah.
still, it's when you're trying to supply. Okay, let's try and break some of this down. And you talk about wheat representing 15% of all the calories consumed in the world. We've
Yes.
got inventory shortages in the West, and Ukraine and Russia account for a third of the world's supply. So, what does that mean? No bread, no pasta. Like, how are we going to see this?
Well, no grain-based products for a larger number of people, essentially. And when I think about regions around the world which are highly vulnerable to what's happening, I would probably start with Northeast Africa, and then the Middle East, and some parts of Europe as well. Again, North America is in this sort of bubble.
Yeah,
Uh, Even politically, Senator Wallin, and I did say that on Monday in Ottawa, I'm not convinced that Canadians actually are fully aware of what's going on around the
yeah.
world. In the United States here, President Biden had decided to extend the ethanol mandate. The food to fuel debate is back. We're actually sacrificing more land
Well,
where we grow corn for biofuels.
I just read that the other day that the state of Iowa is now mandating 15% ethanol in its gasoline, which,
Yes,
I mean, that consumes 50% of the corn crop.
that's
Should we
correct.
be doing that right now?
Exactly. And of course, the focus of that policy is to reduce the cost of energy and the cost of fuel, because a lot of Americans are concerned about the cost of fuel, but they
Right.
don't realize that we're actually sacrificing resources for food production to support lower food fuel prices. So I'm politically, I'm a bit concerned that perhaps Canadians and Americans aren't necessarily aware of the of how dire the situation actually is around the world.
But the Americans are supposedly opening up the stockpiles a little like they did with the oil reserves. They just sort of had to let it out. Do we even have that option here in Canada?
No, not because of 2021. 2021 was really a bad year. If you look at
Yeah.
different charts uh, in your home province of Saskatchewan, I mean, it was a disastrous year. We had to import canola last year. I mean that's how bad the situation was. And so we don't really have a whole lot to play with. Russia has some supplies, China has some supplies. The Americans, what I'm seeing out of the White House is an effort to empower farmers to grow more this year. So they're through Congress right now. There's a package worth $500 million to support farmers to grow more of the crops we need. Unfortunately, in Ottawa, I don't see the same kind of effort. I do see a budget to support a greener agriculture,
Yeah.
which is great, but
Yeah.
this
But that
year,
comes at its own price. If you're, as we were just talking about, if you're using, crops for biofuels, then you're taking away from the food supply in many ways.
that's correct. And I'm very concerned by some of the by the lack of focus, I guess, in terms
Yeah.
of how efficient our agriculture should become in Canada, because Canada can do way more around the world than it is doing now, in my view.
So are we not letting people grow more because we're concerned more about the green agenda at this point? Are you saying it's kind of overriding our emergency, our immediate needs?
Yeah, I I would say this. I think farm-based economics are misunderstood in Ottawa right now. Start with the carbon tax. I would
Yeah.
say. I mean, farmers are price takers. At the end of the day, they are price takers. And right now, they're highly motivated to grow as much as possible because a bushel of wheat is at $12.50 US. They will seed, they will plant, they will grow as much as they can
Right.
to really have to have a banner year this year. But they also need fertilizers. They
Right.
need more inputs. They need more cash to apply precision agriculture practices. I mean, they need more support, which is something I'm not seeing right now. We're seeing some efforts around carbon sequestration. We're recognizing that. So there's some good things, but at the end of the day, it's more about productivity and efficiency, I think.
Yeah.
And
So
it,
that's longer game when you talk about carbon sequestration and those things like capturing it and doing that. But right now, as you say, the carbon tax keeps going up, as including on April 1st. And then you've got fertilizer prices going up and also uh, taxes on them to dissuade their use.
that's correct. And as you know, Senator Wallin, we're slowly marching towards a carbon tax of $170
Yeah.
a ton, a metric ton by 2030. So, and that will have a huge impact on food affordability in Canada. I'm convinced. And right now, based on my discussions with people in Ottawa, I'm not entirely convinced lawmakers are fully aware of how the carbon tax will have a huge impact on food affordability in Canada right now.
Yeah, it's a huge issue. I mean, we're seeing this discussion in the context of the Russia-Ukraine war about oil and energy product and the need for LNG. We could be shipping the natural resources that we have an abundance of to places like Europe so that they could reduce their dependence on that. But we've got this alternate conflicting kind of strategy, which is go green and, reduce the output in those industries.
Exactly, and I don't want to question any of those policies. If the government just feels that that pricing carbon is important, then
Yeah,
that's great. And
that's
we're
their
seeing that
decision. Yeah,
it's a decision, but in farming, implications are much different, and
yeah.
and frankly, I think underappreciated.
Well, and that's a very big industry in our country, not only domestically, but as exporters as well. So it actually does have to be taken into consideration. Talk a little bit. Well, the other thing we see too is, and we should just mention this, that India said it was going to step up and try and help alleviate some of the problem, but it's changed its mind and said we're going to keep our grain product at home to feed our own country. So that's a whole other issue.
Yeah, so going back to that global food security crisis playbook I was
Yeah,
talking about, that's the next element in the playbook. So you have a climate, you have a pandemic,
yeah,
war, and now panic. Nations panicking, nations hoarding. The other day, I did get a few emails from readers and people who follow our work saying, Sylvain, you shouldn't say that we're going to be running out of vegetable oil. People will hoard. Well, maybe,
yeah,
perhaps, but I'm more concerned about countries hoarding or traders hoarding. That's
right,
even worse. And so we saw that with Indonesia a few weeks ago with palm oil.
right.
That was a big hit. And now with India, and unfortunately, I'm expecting more. Just yesterday with India's decision. Now, India is not a huge exporter of wheat, and people may say, "Well, who cares? India is
Yeah,
not a huge," but uh, wheat futures went up 6% that day because
it
it
has an
really
impact.
brings more uncertainty to the market.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
markets have to price it in, and so that's going to actually make a difference to food manufacturers, bread makers, pasta makers, everyone actually buying all of these inputs. And so it's these decisions will have a huge impact, and we are expecting more nations to start reconsidering what they need to do in order to secure food for their own.
so that brings us back to what we should be doing here. So first is raise the flag and awareness and say, people, pay attention. These things that are going on in the world are impacting us. And when you see floods in Manitoba on the news, or that actually impacts farmers that are in the area, and we have to know about that.
I think so. Of course, we can't dramatize everything because
No,
people would be
exactly. Yeah,
overwhelmed. Like the floods in Manitoba, honestly, of course, as devastating as floods may be for for some farmers, I don't think it's going to become a food security issue because
yeah,
at some point things will dry out and they'll go back out there to seed. But droughts are absolutely major issues. The
yeah,
atmospheric rivers we saw last year with BC, the heat dome, and all these things really will impact our agriculture. And we need to be ready for these things. I know that on the one side, the government wants to reduce the impact of climate change, but until we get there, we need to make sure that our supply chains remain resilient, climate resilient, and of course, we need to make sure that our farmers are well supported with proper. I mean, biotech is another issue that
yeah,
comes up from time to time, as you know, Senator Wallin. I mean, we often see groups chastising genetic engineering, and I did raise the issue in Parliament on Monday.
yeah,
And frankly, I think we need to really move on here. Health Canada was supposed to publish guidelines for gene editing in December. Okay, in December of 2021, we are still waiting. And gene editing can actually help crops uh, perform better under
right.
any sort of climatic circumstances. So those
Yeah,
are technologies that need to come forward.
I think it's one of those things that people have in their head, and it's on the one hand, it's the people that produce beef and the traditional things don't don't want the no meat burgers showing up and creating a generation of people that don't want to eat any of that because their livelihood goes. And then you have other people in society that are saying no genetic engineering, it's some kind of weird thing, and we'll all, our bodies will be impacted by this. And we need to be able to have a rational conversation about this when we're talking about genetically engineering wheat. It's things like so it can sustain cold or it can grow in a shorter season. Like this is not, we're not creating monsters here. We're talking about, making
Frankenfoods.
yes,
Frankenfoods. I know
exactly.
there's there, and I've always been a, supporter of transparency and labeling,
Right.
to allow consumers to befriend the enemy they don't know. And I know that Crop Life and BASF and Syngenta, they've always been reluctant to support such policy. But at the end of the day, I think consumers deserve more transparency and also will be allowed to accept and adopt the great things that are going on in agriculture. Agriculture is about technology. That's really what it is.
Absolutely. Our friend Mirabel Katib in Saskatchewan, right? Who
Absolutely.
is creating lentil product for the whole world by using lentils and other products like that, turning it into substances that people are familiar
Murad,
with.
Murad to me is the Wayne Gretzky of pulses. When Wayne Gretzky ended up in LA, I mean, hockey was number 52 on the list of most popular sports in the United States. And then after that, after
Yeah,
many years, we have many franchises now in the U.S. Murad saw something in pulses that nobody saw many years ago and built
yeah,
an empire. And
yeah,
also he understands that what goes on in Saskatchewan in the prairies is so valuable to the rest of the world.
yeah,
All that the region needed is a portal, and
yeah.
that's what AGT is all about.
So this comes back. I mean, it's interesting. We're just looking at some legislation now about deregulation and trying to deal with the red tape nightmare on every issue. But as you say, waiting since last December for some simple, tiny acceptances and rule changes that might change our ability to produce food.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so, well, and you think that mostly comes just because they read the public mood, and if the public sees genetic engineering, they freak out, and so governments go, "Oh, we better not go there."
It's often what I see when talking to Health Canada, unfortunately, and I often say we need to move on. We need to really accept the fact that climate is changing, and the best tool that we have is science.
Yeah,
Plant science has done a wonderful job empowering farming, and not just in Canada, around the world too.
yeah,
And we have to think about the developing world struggling with hunger. That I mean, developing economies just don't have the ability to store calories to do anything really. And when you look at some of the crops that are grown in those regions, I mean, they're highly vulnerable to climate change. And I think Canada can actually make a big difference there if we only democratize the technology a little bit more. So I am a big fan of biotechs, but
right.
also I'm also a bit of a critique in terms of making sure that some of the things that we do develop is accessible for the rest of the world.
Yeah, I think you put it the other day as Canada lacks ambition. That
Yes.
big picture, that like let's take this on and make ourselves the center of the world on these issues because it's good for us, but it is and can be our contribution to the rest of the world.
I thought that the Barton report was our haha moment. I'll be honest with you. I thought, okay, here's a report everyone's going to read a few
Yeah,
years ago, and agriculture was everywhere. To look at our economy and exporting because it was about food autonomy, producing more, but for
yeah,
producing for the rest of the world too. And I thought, wow, this is this is really a great vision for us. But since then, nothing really has happened. You still see a lot of fragmented groups, a fragmented agriculture. We support certain policy without really understanding why, but it's all about us. It's about different provinces and the regions, and the one province that I think is getting it right to a certain extent is the province of Quebec. Of all provinces, I mean,
Yeah,
often Quebec sees food sovereignty as the go-to place. They've adopted 2 years ago a food autonomy policy. And what that means really, it's about producing more for the domestic market while thinking about an open economy and trades. And so now you have Quebecers eating locally grown fresh
yeah,
strawberries 12 months a year. 12 months a year instead of just a month a year.
yeah.
So they're hardwiring the consumer to think local all year round, but they're also exporting these beautiful strawberries are abroad. If we do this right, Senator Wallin, I actually think that instead of buying $4 billion worth of produce from California,
Right.
in 20 years from now, we could do the opposite. We could sell them $4 billion worth of produce because of the water issues that they have.
We've been talking about this, and there's even some economists like Jeff Rubin and others that have been talking about this phenomenon of going local. The farm to table, which always seems just kind of, oh, isn't that lovely if you can get the fresh chicken, over to the expensive little restaurant down the corner. But that's not how you see farm to table. You see it as a very different issue.
Farm to table is awesome as long as you build economies of scale. That's
Right.
basically how I see it. And because at the end of the day, especially right now with inflation as it is now, people are frugal, people are careful. Everyone wants to support local foods,
Yeah.
everyone until life kicks in and budgets kicks in. I mean,
Yes.
that's basically the reality that we all face as consumers. And so you got to make the product attractive, but you also, the other thing that we need to be honest about is that not everything grown in Canada is good. I mean, there are products that aren't as good as products we import from elsewhere, and
Right.
that's great. That's fine. So let's actually focus on what we're good at
Yeah.
and offer it to the rest of it. Like dairy is a good example. Right now, we have a plant in Kingston manufacturing baby formula for China,
I was
but
going
that
to
plant
ask
is
you
owned by
about this.
China, by a Chinese company.
We don't actually get any of that product from that plant. It's
Zero.
all exported.
That's right.
So we can't help a neighbor with a baby formula problem because we can't send it anywhere. Do
Well,
we have one ourselves?
so that's the only plant we have in Canada, and all the baby formula consumed in Canada is imported, unfortunately, from the U.S. And now, because of the shortage, we're getting some products from Europe. But again, a missed opportunity, I think. When I say that Canada lacks ambition, that's a good example. So dairy farmers have always claimed we can't ship milk anywhere in the world. It's too expensive. It can't be done.
Right.
But we needed the Chinese to tell us, to show us how to do it.
But we still haven't done anything with, we're still watching. We haven't then made our own plant next door to,
That's right.
honestly.
So those are the kinds of examples that really,
Yeah.
I think, my goodness, can we just take control and processing? But there are some great things happening though, like in Saskatchewan with the protein industries,
Yeah.
Canada. I must say that that case study is a good one because we're seeing more investment in the prairies. As I mentioned earlier this week, I actually think that Saskatchewan is becoming the prairies
Yeah.
are becoming this protein capital of the world.
We used
You're
to
seeing
think of ourselves as the breadbasket, but protein is way more effective.
there's more money too, let's face it. And frankly, I mean, the innovation happening right now, you have Rocket, Nestle, Merit Foods, all these companies have invested in the prairies in
Yeah.
Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, Lovingly in Calgary. I mean, all of these things are happening. I think it's due to the fact that there is a vision for proteins in the prairies. So why not do that for other aspects of agriculture around the country?
And a lesson from Quebec in terms of what they're
Exactly.
doing as well.
Uh,
Want to ask you a little bit before we let you go on the we talk about competition and all eyes are focused on the Shaw Rogers deal and all of that, but you also suggest that we've got issues in in the food sector where we need to put a closer eye on this because it is impacting the price of food and the access to it.
That's right. I absolutely. So what I've noticed over the last few years, Senator Wallin, is that some people get bogged down into uh, deals that could bring more consolidation in the same market. For
Okay.
example, Longo's with Empire and Farm Boy with Empire in Ontario in recent years.
Yeah.
People are saying, "Oh my goodness, we just lost a few players." Yes, we lost two independents, but I think the larger deals have actually some larger deals have actually led to more consolidation and more power given to fewer players. And I'll give you three of them, three examples.
Okay.
Provigo and Loblaws in 1998, A&P and Metro in 2005, and Empire and Safeway out west in 2013. I think those three deals should have been looked at very differently because it gave, even though they weren't in the same market, it led to more power uh, given to fewer people. And so, in return, what they're doing with that power is squashing processing, food processing. So if you talk to food processors in Canada, they're having a really hard time negotiating appropriate prices for themselves with the bigger players. And the stop sell between Frito Lay and Loblaws is a
Yeah, so
very good example.
explain that stop sell where they just go, no, we're not going to provide that product.
So inflation is going up violently up. And so Frito Lay, Pepsi basically went to the table asking for more money.
Yeah.
And so Loblaw said, no, we're not. We're going to continue to pay you at this price for the next 6 months or so. And Frito-Lay concerned about the price of potatoes, which may go up by 10% next month, they can't
Yeah.
commit to 6 months. So they just said instead of losing money, they just go away. They just walk away without a deal. And that's what happened. It's happening more and more. I know of at least 10 pause sales, not stop sales, pause
Yeah.
sales between a manufacturer, a food manufacturer, and a grocer right now in Canada, and that's a huge problem. And that's why the code of conduct, which is being negotiated right now in Ottawa, is going to be critical to really balance things out and stop what I call supply chain bullying.
Yeah, but nobody is, as for all the other, with all the other things you've laid out in terms of the unpredictability of inputs and price and all of those things. How do you deal with that? I mean, do the processors, the manufacturers of food product, I mean, they've got the producers on what, the farmers or the other form of producer here, and they've got the big grocery chains there. Like, how do we then change that? Is it kind of like you make a weekly price or a daily price because you can't do a 6 month price?
Well, it's more about predictability. The other thing that has been happening in recent years are these extra fees,
Mm.
these impromptu fees charged by Walmart, Loblaws, mainly Loblaws and Walmart, essentially charging more money. Because what's odd about the food business is that you have to pay your customer to do business with them. That's and most people don't know that, but when you're actually selling to Loblaws, you have to pay them a listing fee, merchandising fees, and things like that. And those goes into the thousands and thousands of dollars, which gives zero chance for startups to have a shot at any shelf space at all. And
Well,
that's
and
why
and presumably the farm to table is impacted by that. You can't.
absolutely. I mean, Three Farmers, which is a company out of Saskatchewan that I know
Yeah.
very well. Canmar is another company out of Regina that I know very well. I mean, those companies are having a hard time really getting more exposure retail because of all these fees. And frankly, some of the conditions, market conditions, are unjust. And unlike in the United States here, where you have dozens of grocers, so you do have options at a manufacturer.
Yeah, it's a much more street corner operation in
Yep.
that sense. So that there's some resolution that people are trying to negotiate in Ottawa, but that's again a longer term process because we know how government moves at a snail's pace.
That's right. So the argument right now, I think there is consensus in industry that we need a code of conduct where there's some dissension, I guess, is whether or not government should be involved. And in my view, looking at the UK model, I think the state should be involved because without the government, it's hard to tell Walmart, your behavior is unacceptable. Do you think that Walmart will just follow a voluntary code of conduct? I'm not sure.
Yeah, so you want something that has
With teeth,
consequence to it.
with teeth. Yeah.
So you've raised so many issues here that really need to be wrestled. So here you are, one of the most important thinkers on this issue, really, in this country. I don't think there's any dispute about that. So you wave your little magic agricultural wand tomorrow. What are three things that governments need to do or others need to do at this point? Because we are facing a crisis. This is not just, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we did this over the next few years? This is crisis time.
Absolutely. I think so. I think the starting point would be to give Canada a food autonomy policy. I actually do think, and the one example I would use would be Quebec. So that would be a critical one, and we need to settle our debate around the use of technologies and trades. I mean, a lot of Canadians are scared about because often we sign deals and we always see ourselves buying from
Yes, as
Europe
opposed to
or
selling to. Yeah,
and so in that food autonomy strategy, it should be embedded clearly what the principles are to be to support a food autonomy policy for Canada. I think that to me that would be the most important thing right now. Secondly, supply chain resilience. I actually think it's important to invest more in supply chain resilience in many different directions. So out east, we were blessed with the St. Lawrence Seaway.
right.
Most people don't know this, but moving product on water is cheap and you
Yes,
can grow an
exactly.
economy very well. So we need a St. Lawrence Seaway west and north for
Yeah.
for for Aboriginal communities, and we need to grow an economy there too. And without infrastructure, it's very difficult to do. And you can do it either with railways, but you can also do it with what they call flying white whales. There are different technologies allowing cargo to be floated at a very low price. It takes
Yeah.
longer, but Barry Prentice from the University of Manitoba has been really just screaming on his soapbox for decades about white whales in Canada because it's actually a very cheap way to move products to support the north as much as possible. So food autonomy, supply chain resiliency, and third, I think it boils down to the consumer. Uh, Consumers just basically uh, educating consumers about good food and I think there is some momentum there with the food guide. There
Yeah.
is some momentum there, but more education about good food and good nutrition is super
And bang
important.
for buck and
Yeah,
how to do the two together. You know, we
gardening, you know.
yeah, we looked at this issue in the Senate and a lot of people just said it was too late, that it's too difficult in this day and age to do the mega projects. But we looked at a corridor where trains and trucks and technology and fiber and all of those things negotiate with Indigenous communities and provincial governments and local governments. But it's hard to see people. I mean, if we had to build the railway today, I don't think it would get done.
No, And it was already hard then. Imagine
Yes.
now. So we need to work on that because I was in Tampa Bay at a conference called Phosphorus 2022, and I was asked to brief American investors on the situation again on fertilizers and logistics. And it was a few days before the CP lockout. Do you
Yeah.
remember in the
Yeah.
spring? Well, I talked to them about the lockout, and basically the reaction in the room was, "Oh my God, not again." And
Yeah.
so the reputation, and of course the blockades in the winter
Yeah.
with the Ambassador Bridge and everything else, just really affected Canada's reputation logistically. And this is something we need to accept and we need to work on as a country. We
Yeah.
need to get to a better place, reputation-wise, when it comes to transportation.
That's a very, very key point. So many very smart things for us to think about. Thanks, Dr. Charlebois. We're going to come back to you because it's not like these issues are going away anytime soon. So,
No, well, let's hope that I mean, let's hope that this crisis is not going to go
yeah,
to waste. We're going to learn from it.
yeah, don't let a good crisis go to waste for sure. We'll call you at the end of the summer and see if we've got our stockpiles back up and you'll be back in Canada. So, thanks so
Absolutely.
much for your time today. It's just great.
Thank you, Senator.
We'll see you soon.
Bye bye.
Dr. Sylvain Charlebois, really one of the country's leading experts on all things agriculture and ag tech. So a great conversation. And that is it today for No Nonsense with Pamela Wallin. See you soon.